we get a bad appraisal, it can wreck the whole deal. And everyone gets pissed at the appraiser, right? It's like, what the hell is this guy doing? Where did he come up with this value? So I want to dig into like how, the values are kind of, how you guys come up with the values that you do. I know it's comparables for the most part. Sometimes you get in these neighborhoods and it's hard to find comparables. So what are you doing to like really find the best comparables? Definitely love like the relationship building aspect of it, where I get to meet people and talk to them, and kind of learn more about their side of the business. Cause you only see it like on the lending side, we see a bunch of stuff, but we don't always get the view of an appraiser or a real estate agent. So.
Yeah, no, I enjoy that too for the same reasons when I interviewed people. And I appreciate you showing interest in just seeing what us appraisers do and all that.
Well, we'll get started. So,
okay.
Today's topic, the number one thing that can make or break a residential transaction is the appraisal. The funny part is a lot of us that are in this business that are real estate professionals, we don't know a whole lot about how the appraisal process works. And then you have the ever-changing market conditions lately. It seems like, just over the past 4 years, the values have shot through the roof. The appraisals are getting harder. And it's just something that I want to spread some light on for everybody in the community. And I have a ton of questions for you. So I'm probably going to grill you a little bit on some stuff because there's questions on the lending side. I'm like, how the hell did this guy come up with this value, right?
Yeah, and I can only answer for myself. I don't know, but
yeah, and that's okay, right? And this is the kind of stuff I want to talk about. But before we dive into that, tell us how long you've actually been in the appraisal business, Jamie.
Yeah, so I started my apprenticeship in 1998, and then I was licensed in 2000 and certified in 2007. And so I've been appraising full time that whole time as an appraiser.
Okay, so you've been in the business for a while. So
yeah,
so you went through the 2008 crash, then, right?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay, so how is that? I'm just curious. So like one day you have a ton of business and the next day none?
No, to be honest with you, my business slowed down maybe a year and a half before that.
Okay,
and the reason was there were people, like loan officers that needed to hit a certain number, wanted to hit a certain number. And I was not able to, meet their requests. Like the data is what it is. And so to be honest with you, just being straightforward, I started losing some business because, there were some people out there that were hitting those numbers. And so my business really did slow down prior to 08. So then 08 hit, and then things did drop off like crazy. And then a short time after things were going nuts, I started getting a lot of forensic field review work and bank work. And then that kept me busy through that time, but it was tough.
I talked to a lot of people that were doing like the foreclosure stuff, and obviously there was plenty of that going on.
Yeah. It was,
but yeah, I can see I guess that's why we are where we are today after all that 2008 crash is like, and we can't talk to appraisers. It's like, I need this value, like having people say, I need this value. And you're like, well, it's not there. That's kind of tough, right? You can't close the loan then.
It is tough. It's tough on all sides. No, we totally get that. And it was rough.
But, so I guess that's opposite of what happened in COVID, right? I mean, we were all scared initially, like, what the hell is going to happen here? And then things just exploded. So, the start of COVID, were you just like going nuts, obviously, with all the refinances and everything?
Yeah, things did explode. It was a weird time because, for a while we've been expecting like a market reset, kind of anticipated. And then as soon as COVID hit, I thought, well, here we go. This is it. And then the opposite happened because there was already a shortage of inventory. That became worse when they lowered the rates. There was such high demand, and it was crazy. In fact, there was one bank that I do direct work for, and I was saying in my reports and making time adjustments of like 20% appreciation a year for some of these properties. And I had a reviewer call me and say, is that right? I mean, that seems so aggressive. And I showed them the data. I said, this is what the data is showing. And they're like, I guess you're right. And now looking back, they're like, yeah, things were appreciating that rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, since COVID, I mean, 30-40% on some areas,
and maybe even more, honestly.
And I think that's what's worrying a lot of people about thinking that there's a housing crash coming. And I mean, that's a different topic, but just like you said, the inventory is low. You need inventory in order to have a housing crisis, like a housing crash, which we don't have. And this is why that the homes are appreciating so quickly is the shortage of inventory.
Yeah.
I mean, is that correct? I mean, is that basically right? Supply and demand, right? I mean, it's that
exactly.
simple.
Okay. It's exactly that. Yeah. In fact, even now with the rates as high as they are, relatively speaking, prices are still appreciating,
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, I think I think the last report that came out, it was like 6 or 7% still year over year appreciation.
So, probably overall. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, different markets obviously are, I think like there's markets like Seattle and maybe parts of California and parts of Florida that are kind of struggling a little bit, but here in the Midwest, we're still rocking and appreciation is going nuts.
Yeah.
But what I want to dig into, and this is, I mean, I've been in the business for 10 years. And there's still some things I don't understand about appraisals. And it almost feels like that it is subjective, but I think a lot like, okay, so we get a bad appraisal. It can wreck the whole deal. And everyone gets pissed at the appraiser, right? It's like, what the hell is this guy doing? Where did he come up with this value? So I want to dig into like how, the values are kind of, how you guys come up with the values that you do. I know it's comparables for the most part. But sometimes you get in these neighborhoods and it's hard to find comparables. So what are you doing to like really find the best comparables?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is difficult right now because the volume of sales is so low, and it has been for the last couple of years. It's hard to find data.
Okay.
So, if I'm doing lender work, we try to find the best sales we can find as close as possible. But if there's nothing in that close proximity, that's really comparable, then we've got to go outside of that neighborhood or market area, or go back in time. I know it's difficult because with lending work, they want at least 3 sales that have sold, in the last year, ideally the last few months.
Yeah, right.
But, there are times when like the best sale sold over a year ago, maybe it was a year and a half ago. So, and this is especially for like unique properties, or properties in areas where there's just not a lot of good sales, like maybe lakefront properties in some areas. So what I do if I'm doing a bank appraisal is I'll still add it as a 4th comparable sale. I use the best 3 I can find that sold in the last year, but then I'll add this 4th one, and that's really my best comp. So but the key to that is we have to do a really good market analysis to know how much prices have changed for those comparable sales. So if I don't make a time adjustment or market condition adjustment to a comparable sale, and sales prices of competing homes are changing rapidly, what you end up with is like a historical value, which doesn't do anyone any good for lending purposes. So what we do is we first start off pulling the trends of like overall single family homes. If I'm appraising a single family home, and we analyze those sales, supply and demand, those kinds of things. But then we'll narrow it down to properties that compete more with the property we're appraising. So more similar square footage, lot size, that kind of thing. And then what those trends are doing, if we can find enough data to do it this way, that's what we apply. So if competing homes were appreciating at 10% a year over the past 2 years, and my best comp is 2 years ago, what we do is we prorate that 10% of the sales price from the contract date of that comparable sale to the effective date of the appraisal. Sometimes that's a very large positive.
So you add in the appreciation.
Exactly. So, or if the market's going down, we do the opposite.
Right.
Or if it's flat, then there is no change. So, but that's why market analysis is so important. Even even if a home sold, if we're using comparable sales, it sold like 2 or 3 months ago. If the prices are changing for homes that compete with that property, I still make those time adjustments because, when those properties went under contract to the time that I'm doing the appraisal on this property, if prices are still increasing, there's going to be, those properties would have sold for a little bit more.
Right. So like 3 months, that'd be tough, right? And we have seen, like, again, when you have like 20% appreciation in 1 year, 3 months is a big difference, right?
Sure
that can add, on an expensive property, $10,000.
Or even a lot more.
Even more, right?
Yeah.
Depending on what, the purchase prices are. So how do you, I feel like that gets into a real difficult territory because it's such a short period of time. Like, how do you really justify that appreciation? Are you going off of like what's currently listed and what has sold in the past like week, or like how do you figure out that, or is it computer generated, like, or is it up to you? Like, I just don't understand that part of it.
So it's up to the appraiser, and if we're in an area where there's a lot of sales, a lot of data we can work with, what I do is, I'll look in the market area for homes that compete with the property I'm appraising. So they may not be technically comparable, like it may be ranches and colonials, but they're all similar similar lot size, similar square footage, and a prospective buyer may consider one or the other. So we pull this data to try to get what's called the market segment for the subject property. And then what I do is I put that on an Excel spreadsheet, and then I use simple regression, to be able to figure out how much, the trends are what the trend is on the trend line. Right. And then that's what I apply to the comparable sales.
So if I go from like you as an appraiser to another guy, like, is the value really dependent on the actual appraiser, or is there kind of like a standard that you guys have, or is there a computer program like where you're going to come up with pretty much close to the same value as another appraiser? Or is it like where you go to hire a contractor and you get a $10,000 quote and a $50,000 quote? Like, is it just like shooting in the dark? Like, I don't like, how does it work? Is it very dependent on the actual appraiser?
It is, and the more skilled an appraiser is, and if two skilled appraisers are appraising the same property on the same day or pretty similar time period, and they're looking at the same data, generally we're going to be, within a ballpark, a reasonable ballpark. It's rare that two appraisers come in at the same number, but sometimes that happens too. But usually they're going to be a little different. Could be here or there. Yeah, it could be the adjustments, how they pull the adjustments from the market, how they supported their time adjustments, if those are supported. They may have picked some sales that were a little different comparable sales than one appraiser picked, but they're all, as long as they're truly supportable appraisals, they've been developed based on USPAP standards, which is the uniform standard of professional appraisal practice. If they're based on that and they've done things the right way, you could have two appraisers that are both correct. They both have supportable opinions of value, though they might be a little bit different.
So it's truly opinion. So
it is.
It's opinion based with some science and math behind it. Obviously.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you could really get a completely different, and this has happened in some of the transactions that I've been in where, I've had a Lakewood house appraised for $240,000 from a different appraiser. Agent calls me, he's like, "Hey, this person doesn't understand Lakewood." We get the appraisal back and it's literally $200,000 more, like $440,000, like that. Wow. And this was like and I don't know, you've seen this, I'm sure, over the years, but this was like kind of like an online lender that did the appraisal, had any clue. But I'm surprised, like, how do you come up with that big of a discrepancy?
There shouldn't be that big of a discrepancy. When you have something that big, there's a problem. Yeah. Okay. There has to be a reason why that there's that big of a difference.
And I guess you could just be that it's a bad appraiser.
It could be, or maybe they used an AVM, or they did some kind of a desktop appraisal, and the appraisers doesn't have all the facts. So it could be a lot of different things, But yeah, to be that far off, one of them is wrong. So, so
yeah, I guess that's true. So I mean, like banks, they could do whatever they want. I mean, they could use an AVM or a desktop appraisal. And are you guys like more conservative than you are kind of like? I guess I don't fully understand what risk is on your end as an appraiser. Like, do you really try to hit that number that they listed it for? Do you go over? How much do you go over? Like, explain to me like the risk as being the appraiser. Like, where does it land on your shoulders in the transaction?
That's a good question. To be honest with you, I personally don't think about risk. I just think about developing the most supportable opinion of value that I can based on the market data I'm looking at. And then if you do that, there's not a lot of risk. I mean, there is always risk when we do an appraisal. We could make a mistake or things can happen, but when, like, for a purchase agreement, we have to review the purchase agreement if it's available. We have to consider that listing, the home we're appraising, how many offers were made on it, why is it pending for what it's pending for? Is there market demand? So it's not a target. We can't use the contract price as a target, but we do have to consider it. If we just ignore it, I mean, that could be a problem. So we consider it. You've got a member of the market that's selling this property. You've got a member of the market that's buying it, so that is part of the consideration. A lot of times in recent years, things have appreciated so rapidly that a lot of my appraisals, my opinions have been a little bit higher than the contract price, because by the time that property went under contract to the time that I'm actually appraising it, the prices have increased. So I'm not concerned about going over contract price as long as my opinion of value is supportable. Like, for instance, someone might get a great deal on a property.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that that's the market value. They just got a good deal on it. Maybe it's worth more.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's worth less too. Something gets bid up to a point where someone loves this house. He had 5 offers that were at this price, and the one guy with the cash from, is able to, buy it out. And
oh yeah, I want to ask you about that. That's a great topic, because we see, maybe not as much in the recent few months, but especially during COVID, we saw these people putting in appraisal gaps, right? And that's where they have to cover the gap between the purchase price and the appraisal if the appraisal comes in below the purchase price or whatever their agreed sales price is. Are you still seeing a lot of appraisal gaps right now?
I'm not. But I will, full disclosure, only about 20% of my work is bank work these days. So to be honest with you, I probably am not the best person to ask about
the residential stuff.
Yeah, as far as, I mean, I do a lot of that's all I do is residential work, but I do a lot of divorce work, probate, a little bit of litigation. So, of the 20% of the bank work that I do, I've not really seen as much in the last year.
Yeah, we're not seeing a lot on our end, obviously, because there's not. I mean, there's still a lot of offers on homes, but I just don't. I mean, a lot of the homes are coming in at value for the most part. I think we probably have, if I had to give you a percentage, I'd say maybe 25% of ours are coming in under value, kind of if I just shooting in the dark. Now don't quote me on those numbers, but yeah, I think there's not as many appraisal gaps. But I wanted to ask you also, because I've seen this before, if you list a property for under the list price and and it's clearly under market value, and it gets bid up to 20,000 above the list price. Even though you see that the list price was way lower, do you guys you said you take in the amount of offers that are actually presented, correct?
Correct. Because that's where the demand's at, right? People are making offers on this property. There's some market demand there, and we have to consider that. And we recognize that that's a strategy too. Bid it, list it low, and then let it get bid up. That's a strategy. Right. So it really still ultimately depends on what other competing sales are doing, as far as market value goes. But that's one piece of the puzzle that we have to consider.
All right. So I want to do some renovations to my house as a homeowner, or maybe I'm a real estate agent and I want to give my clients advice on how to increase their values. Like, what is going to be the most valuable renovation that you can do? Can you kind of spread some light on that, where you guys get the most value out of, like, is it a bathroom? Is it a kitchen? Is it adding a bedroom?
Yeah, and this is subjective too, but just based on my experience, what I've seen that adds the most value would be remodeled kitchens and bathrooms and interior finishes. Those all make a difference. Quality makes a difference, but when you have a home, the quality's kind of baked in unless you really make some heavy duty modifications. But kitchens, bathrooms, interior finishes, those are probably the biggest return on investment. And finished basements. If you got an unfinished basement and you finish it, there's some pretty good return there as well. So there seems to be a huge misconception on basements, because like you'll get, and this is like a big question, right? Like, people are like, I have another 2,000 square feet in my basement. Why is it not counted? So tell me a little bit about that. Like, how do you guys deal with basements? How do you deal with bathrooms that are down in basements? What kind of value do you give a basement, finished or not finished? Yeah, and the amount of the value really depends on the market. But valuing a home, it really falls under two levels. It's either above grade or below grade. So typically, above grade finished square footage, above grade bathrooms, bedrooms, typically they give you a higher contributory value than basement finished square footage. But it's not quite that simple too, because you also have value in the basement, right? So even if you have an unfinished basement, if you're comparing that to a home with no basement, there's value for the basement already. So we've got to consider that. And then the amount that's finished of the basement, that also we usually adjust for that if the market reflects that there's value in that. Normally it does. So, but I know the confusion that a lot of people have is that they think, okay, well, it's a walkout basement, so we can automatically include it in the gross living area. But that's just not true, and it's really not been that way for a long time. If you download the Fannie Mae Selling Guide or FHA's 4000.1 handbook, and you do a search for basement, you will see, and it's been this way for a long time, that basement finished square footage is not included in the gross living area. In fact, do you care if I read? I've got this up here.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, because this is a huge question. I mean, I just had this happen. So
yeah, and so it's really. This is taking it right to Fannie Mae. So this is from Fannie Mae's 2023 Selling Guide, but this is nothing new. It's been this way for many years. But here's what it says under gross living area. It says only finished above grade areas can be used in calculating and reporting of above grade room count and square footage for the gross living area. Fannie Mae considers a level to be below grade if any portion of it is below grade, regardless of the quality of its finish or the window area of any room. Therefore, a walkout basement with finished rooms would not be included in the above grade room count. Rooms that are not included in the above grade room count may add substantially to the value of a property, which is true, particularly when the quality of the finish is high. For that reason, the appraiser should report the basement or other partially below grade areas separately and make appropriate adjustments for them on the basement and finished rooms below grade line in the sales comparison approach adjustment grade. That's right from Fannie Mae. So that's crazy.
So like, and this is what happened recently. Like, I had someone like, I have 3 full baths.
Yeah.
They're like, well, one's in the basement.
Yeah.
And they're not counting that as a full bath. And I just think that there's a big misunderstanding there.
That's what it really is. I mean, I understand people why they think that, and they do have 3 baths, right? It's just that one's in the basement. And so that falls on us as appraisers, though. We have to analyze the market and say, well, how much are people paying for a basement bathroom? How much is the market paying for the price per square foot of finished basement area? So
That sounds like it gets pretty hard.
it's not as hard as you would think. It can be tricky, but usually it's pretty straightforward. A lot of times I use a depreciated cost method for supporting my adjustments, and you can break it down. Above grade finished square footage, below grade finished square footage, then basement area, and things like that. So it's not that difficult.
Do you ever have agents, listing agents, give you like comps?
Oh yeah.
Is that helpful for you?
I find it helpful. Yeah. A lot of times it's probably sales I'm already considering.
Sure.
But there are times when, agents know their market really well, good agent. And there've been times where an agent gives me a comp and for whatever reason, it didn't show up in my search and it's right in the neighborhood. I don't know why it didn't. And it's a fantastic comp. So, and I would have missed it if I had just done my own searches through the MLS. So I really appreciate it when agents give me comparable sales.
Is that like industry wide? Do you think most appraisers appreciate that, or do some take it as like, I don't need your comps?
Yeah, it just depends on the appraiser. Some appreciate it, and some are like, I'm gonna do my own work.
Right.
Actually, I had one agent tell me that an appraiser like took it and ripped it up in front of her, and that is not reflective of our profession. Most appraisers are actually, but yeah. So, but I would recommend offering it to the appraiser. If they don't want it, that's fine. But
talk to me about reconsideration of values. This is another hot topic, right? Because anytime the appraisal comes in low, that's immediately where we go, right? That agents are like, no, like I have this comp, like he's not including this square footage. So when we do a reconsideration of value, I mean, how seriously do I guess you and then maybe other appraisers take that? Is it more like, it gave you my value, that's it?
Well,
because it's almost like saying, hey, you didn't do your research, right?
Yeah, I personally don't take it that way. I think some appraisers might, but I think most professional appraisers take this very seriously. I do. I don't get a lot of this reconsideration of value, but when I do, I take it very seriously because I want to get it right.
Right.
And the appraiser, we're giving you our opinion of value based on our data, but we get it wrong sometimes. So yeah, I take it seriously. Now, most of the time, I'll tell you, most of the time, what they end up giving me are sales that are not as comparable as the ones I used. Or there's something that's not quite right about those sales. And, but I'll explain, why. But there have been times, it doesn't happen often, but there have been times where I came in at a number that they asked for a reconsideration of value and they gave me some sales. And lo and behold, kind of like I told you before, like there's ones like, okay, I missed this one and it's a really good comp. And I'll change my value because I'd rather get it right than like dig in. And I think that it's better for professionals just for us to be reasonable, sure. if we miss something, to make a change. The problem is that sometimes appraisers are afraid that if they make a change, they're admitting that they made a mistake. And so some dig in because they're afraid of some retribution from the, the lender or who knows.
Backlash somehow, like, and then if they give you a higher value and then it's somehow, something happens and then they're kind of responsible. I could see that's kind of tough.
It is.
So the, like when you're, how do I want to ask this question? So the quality of work, you kind of touched on that, but I'll have some people are like, hey, I have this comp and their house is like not redone at all, right? They'll be like, oh, this house over here sold for $100,000 more than mine. Like, how much does that interior renovation matter in terms of value?
Oh, it's a huge value. It impacts value big time. Yeah. I mean, if I'm appraising a home that's totally renovated, I'm going to try to find sales that are renovated to a pretty similar degree. And if the comps I'm looking at are not renovated, then I'll have to make an adjustment, if the market supports it. And usually it does, you
Yeah.
know, or the other way around, you know, if I'm appraising a home that's, you know, just, you know, average shape, and then I've got some sales that are totally renovated. I mean, I'd rather not even use a renovated sale if I'm appraising a home that's in average condition. But sometimes, you know, you've got 3 sales, they're the best that are out there, and one
I
just
think that happens a lot. I think like,
Yeah.
especially in like, and I don't know how many, you know, whoever's listening to this, but like our, like Ohio City, Tremont, where you have like some of
Yeah.
these brand new renovated homes, and then someone's trying to sell one that's, you know, needs a ton of work. So I guess, you know, you'd have to take the different, I don't know how you guys look at it. You're like, hey, that would cost like 150 grand to get it to this condition. Do you like look at it like that, or?
Not so much like that, because, you know, cost does not always equal value. It usually doesn't. And but what we try to do is look for comparable sales for the market evidence of how much, you know, what the market difference would be. Like, how much of a difference are buyers paying for a renovated property versus one that's not renovated?
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So when have you done any FHA appraisals?
Oh yeah, many.
This is also obviously a hot topic for, you know, and this is, I guess, why a lot of FHA offers are not as competitive, right? But I think there's a lot of misconceptions in that FHA appraisal. And I think people maybe think like, I'm automatically going to get repairs. What are some of the things that you're looking for right off the bat when you're doing an FHA appraisal?
One of the big ones is peeling paint on homes built from 1978 and beyond, or before 1978, because the potential for lead, even though they may not have lead in it, we don't test the paint. So it's just an automatic condition. If a home has peeling paint on the inside or the exterior, could be the fence, could be the garage trim, whatever, decks, that all has to be scraped and painted, and the chipping paint has to be, you know, removed. So that's probably the number one thing I see. Handrails, you know, they've done away with handrail requirements on the inside, or, you know, but there are situations where an appraiser might still call it out if they feel like it's a health and safety issue. I think that it's been a while since I've done an FHA appraisal, but I think it's, if there's an 18-inch rise, you've got to have railing and handrails. So that's a kind of a big one I see.
Are you guys like, you don't, your appraisers don't go up on roofs and stuff, right?
No. We do have to go in attics and crawl spaces though for FHA. So, you know, if we're able to access the attic, we're supposed to go and take a visual look at it. Now they've changed that a little bit so that if it's not possible to get up in the attic without moving a bunch of things, I don't believe that we are required to now, but we'd have to explain why we couldn't get up in the attic or the crawl space. One thing with crawl spaces too, you know, there has to be a certain height. You know, it's got to be a certain height, and then you can't have a bunch of junk, you know, in the crawl space. So I've appraised some homes where there's just a ton of personal property in there, and that has to be removed.
So actually, I forgot to ask you about this earlier, the height thing. So what are the requirements to count? Like, there's a lot of, and you'll see this like in Lakewood, and a lot of areas will have like a finished attic, right?
Yeah.
But then sometimes it won't count as square footage, or only partial of it'll count as square footage. So like, what is the height requirement? Is it like 8 feet of walking? Like, I don't understand. What is the actual requirement for height?
So we have to use ANSI standards now for, you know, lending appraisals. So it has to have a minimum of 7 feet high ceilings with at least 50% of the floor area. And the floor area starts where the ceiling comes down. So you measure from the floor up to where the ceiling comes down 5 feet. That's where you start measuring.
The knee wall. Yeah. Okay.
The knee wall, exactly. And so 50% of that area should have a ceiling height of at least 7 feet.
Okay. So you can, I mean, that's actually fair. I mean,
but here's the trick with that, because the same is true with like a Cape Cod or a bungalow in like Euclid. You know, most of those don't even have 7 foot high ceilings, right?
Right.
So, but that doesn't mean that buyers are looking at that and saying, well, there's obviously no finished area up there, right? They're going to use that as a bedroom or, you know, whatever. So as appraisers, we have to report our measurements based on ANSI standards. So you couldn't include it in the gross living area. But if buyers are looking at that with the same value per square foot, we have to find a way to make that adjustment to reflect what the market's doing. So even if we don't include it in the gross living area, if we're looking at comparable sales and they've got something similar, we have to address that.
So when we're looking, and I've seen it on my end, but like agents, when they're reviewing an appraisal, can you like break down or like make it easier? Like, what are they looking at when they look at those adjustments? Because sometimes they don't get it. They're like, hey, like he didn't give me value for this. I mean, I see it on our end. It's like, hey, he gave you like $10,000. And so like as a realtor or a lender or someone who doesn't like do it for profession, like, not an appraiser by profession, what's the easiest way to tell like how you came up with your value?
The only way to really tell is if the appraiser tells you how they did it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then if you're the client of the appraiser, you have the right to ask them to show their work, how they support it.
Oh, you do? Okay. So, yeah. And I tell some of my clients, like, hey, just call the appraiser. Like you could actually call them. Like we could ask questions, but we can't do anything about value. But
actually we can't even talk to the homeowner. In fact, if you look at the Fannie Mae pre-printed 1004 form, it says that the homeowner, they're not an intended user. The intended users is the lender. So really the only person we can talk to is the lender about those kinds of things, if it's a lending appraisal.
Yeah. Okay.
But
can a realtor or someone call you just with questions on like why you didn't count certain square footage or something?
We can talk in generalities.
Okay.
But because of confidentiality reasons, we can't get real specific with them about the appraisal because the lender is the client. Mm-hmm. But we can talk in generalities about those kinds of things. So I know it gets to be like you're walking a line, right?
Right.
If an agent calls me, I'll try to explain things in general terms so they can kind of get an idea. If the lender says, "Hey, you can go ahead and talk to him," then I will.
Okay. So what is like? How big of a difference does it make, like having a clean house versus a dirty house? Like, and not, like it's just dirty or it's not cleaned up or it's not picked up. There's clutter in the room or whatever. Does that make a difference? I mean, I would think it would, just being like you're human. You're like, okay, this place is trashed. You're not going to give it a high value. But tell me how much consideration you give that.
That is such a hard question because I think as appraisers, we're also human, and we try to be not influenced by these things. There could be some influence,
right?
But we do strive. Like if I'm doing an appraisal, if it's just lived in, that's not going to make a difference. I mean, I'm looking at the finishes, the floor, the upgrades, things like that, and if the personal content is just messy or the person is just messy, that should not have any impact on market value. There are times though where the home is so messy that it started to affect the finishes. Right. Like you can see the carpet's just worn, the finishes are worn, there's nicks in the walls. And so that does impact market value because a buyer's going to go in there and it's going to be a turnoff. But just personal content, it usually doesn't impact the market value, but it really depends. Like a homeowner hired me to appraise their property. Or no, this was a lender. This was like 5-6 years ago. The homeowner was asking me, does personal property impact market value? I'm like, not normally. But when I got there, like they were a hoarder, and it was a bad case of it. I couldn't even see some of the walls. There was so much debris.
Oh my God.
That affected it. But it wasn't in great shape either. So it just depends, But generally, if just someone just normally, they're a little sloppy, whatever. As long as the finishes aren't affected, it shouldn't make a difference.
So like does putting new paint on and all that, does that make a difference at all in terms of value? Like new paint, maybe
It does.
Landscaping.
Not something that landscaping, all that curb appeal, it does make a difference. The problem is sometimes it's all those little things together that that make a big difference. So we don't really adjust. If a home has been freshly painted on the interior, we're not going to make an adjustment for freshly painted versus not, right?
Right.
But what we do is, like, I'll look at the interior MLS photos of the comparable sales I'm using, and usually I'll call the agent and say, hey, can you tell me a little bit about the condition of this home? And a lot of times I'll at least have one that has a freshly painted interior or it's been really well maintained. So I think to say that it doesn't impact value wouldn't really be honest, but how much it's like all these little things add up, and we don't adjust for all the little things necessarily. So,
cool. So, all right, well, we'll wrap it up here. I do appreciate you coming on, but sure. So you said you do a lot of divorces, maybe a lot of appraisals for people who just want an appraisal on their house. So tell me a little bit about your business, give yourself a plug here, and how people can get a hold of you if they need an appraiser.
Hey, I really appreciate that. Yeah. So
yeah.
Like right now, my tax bill work is like through the roof, as you can imagine, for Cuyahoga County. So I do that. I do a lot of tax bill work when it's tax bill season. Most of my work is divorce work these days. It's just my work has shifted. So if you need an appraisal for that reason, probate, private cash deals, I do those pre-listing appraisals, post-listing appraisals. So if someone has their home on the market and then it's not selling and they want to know, hey, what's the market value? I do that kind of work. So yeah, there's a lot of different estate planning, all those kinds of things. So if you want to get a hold of me, I've got two websites. My main website is aspenappraisalservices.com. And there's a lot of information there on me. I also write a blog at the clevelandappraisalblog.com, which that's what I've got in the back here. Nice. And so I try to write articles that are helpful to the public. They're really focused on the public. I've got charts from the research I do that I post monthly. So yeah, you can get a hold of me in any of those ways.
Great. Well, that sounds awesome, Jamie. I do appreciate you coming on, taking the time to educate us on the appraisal process. And one last question before I let you go, just because this whole channel is kind of based around helping real estate professionals, people that are out there aspiring to be appraisers, or that want to get in the business. Like, what do you suggest for those kind of people? Like, is it a good time? Is it a bad time? Is it?
Over the years, I'm always changing. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, it's an awesome time to be an appraiser. And then sometimes I'm like, nah, I wouldn't recommend it. Right now it's a challenging time. Our profession's changing too. There's a lot changing as far as technology, but I would still recommend it. I love being an appraiser, and I think it's a good profession to get into. The hardest part is finding someone to apprentice under. So there's some different ways that you can do that. Like through the Appraisal Institute's got a program that you can use, PARIA. So there's different ways you can do that. If you're looking to become an appraiser or find an appraiser to apprentice under, I would go to the Ohio Coalition of Appraisers website and reach out to them. I'm a member of the OCAP, and we can try to help you find someone to apprentice under. So you could do it that way. That's the hardest part, but it's a great profession. It's got its ups and downs, but so does being a loan officer.
That's right. The whole industry does. The highest highs and the lowest lows.
Exactly. Yeah. You ask an agent, a couple years ago, fantastic. Right now, it's like,
I feel like the technology is kind of playing a big role in like title companies and even on the lending side. But we're getting a lot of appraisal waivers, and that kind of cuts you guys out, which sucks. But
we understand it too.
Yeah.
It's reasonable. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, cool. Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate you. It was a pleasure talking with you, and hope to have you on again sometime soon. And I'll grill you on some new topics.
I would love it. Anytime. Good to see you.
Thanks, Jamie. Call Jamie if you guys have any questions. All right. See you.